Single dad veteran stopped armed robber at bank. The thief was his brother's killer. But when the mask came off, the hero froze because the man he just saved everyone from was the same one who took his brother's life. And what happened next would tear open a secret. 15 years buried in blood, guilt, and forgiveness. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The autumn wind rustled through the maple trees lining Maplewood's main street as Jack Reynolds pulled his weathered pickup truck into the mechanic shop's parking lot. The familiar scent of motor oil and rubber greeted him as he stepped out, tugging his worn leather jacket closer against the morning chill. Well, look who finally decided to grace us with his presence. Hank Miller's booming voice echoed across the garage. The older mechanic was already elbow-deep in the engine of a beaten-up Chevy, his salt and pepper hair peeking out from under his grease-stained cap. Jack managed a small smile. "Morning, Hank. Thought I'd mix things up and actually show up for work today." "Ha!" Hank wiped his hands on a red shop rag. "You know what else might mix things up? Actually saying yes to my sister-in-law about that coffee date." Jack's smile faded slightly as he reached for his toolbox. "Not happening, Hank. Come on, Jack. It's been 2 years. Hank's voice softened, losing its teasing edge. "Sarah wouldn't want you spending the rest of your life alone." Jack focused intently on organizing his tools, though they were already perfectly arranged. "I've got Emma. That's all I need right now. That little girl of yours is an angel, no doubt about it." Hank leaned against the workbench. "But she needs to see her daddy living again, not just existing." The words hit closer to home than Jack wanted to admit. He thought about Emma's face that morning, how she'd tried to make his coffee just the way Sarah used to. Too much sugar and not enough cream, but he'd drunk every drop because of the pride in her eyes. "Look, I appreciate the concern," Jack said, pulling on his work gloves. "But I've got enough on my plate right now." Hank raised his hands in surrender. All right. But at least come to the barbecue this weekend. The guys miss you, and Emma loves playing with Kelly's kids." Before Jack could respond, the shop phone rang. Hank answered it, then held out the receiver. "Speaking of your girl, it's the school." Jack's heart skipped a beat as he grabbed the phone. "Hello? Yes, this is Emma Reynolds' father. Mr. Reynolds, this is Mrs. Martinez from the front office. Emma's fine," she added quickly, obviously hearing the tension in his voice. "She just forgot her science project at home. She's pretty upset about it." Jack closed his eyes, remembering the carefully constructed solar system model sitting on the kitchen table. "I'll bring it right over. You're a lifesaver, Mr. Reynolds." After hanging up, Jack turned to Hank, who was already waving him off. "Go on. Take care of your girl. I've got things covered here." "Thanks, Hank. I owe you one. Add it to your tab." Hank called after him as Jack headed for his truck. The drive home was quick, the streets of Maplewood still quiet in the late morning. Jack's house stood modest but neat among its neighbors, the American flag gently waving in the breeze. Sarah's flower beds, now tended by Emma, still bloomed with stubborn late-season mums. Inside, Jack found the science project right where Emma had left it, planets carefully painted and hung with fishing line from a wooden frame. As he picked it up, something white caught his eye beneath it. An envelope. His heart stuttered when he saw the Veterans Affairs logo in the corner. He'd almost forgotten about the insurance claim he'd filed after Sarah's passing. With slightly trembling hands, he tore open the envelope. The check inside represented more than money. It was possibility, the chance to finally fix up the house like Sarah had always wanted, to start a college fund for Emma, to begin building something new from the ashes of their loss. Jack carefully tucked the envelope into his jacket pocket. He'd deposit it tomorrow, but right now, Emma needed her science project. The school hallways echoed with his footsteps as he carried the model to Emma's classroom. Through the window in the door, he could see her sitting at her desk, shoulders slumped. When he knocked, her whole face lit up. "Daddy!" She rushed to take the project, careful not to tangle the strings. Thank you. Anytime, sweetheart." He helped her set it up on the display table, where other students' projects were already arranged. Emma's was easily the most detailed. She'd even painted the asteroids in the belt between Mars and Jupiter. "Mom helped me pick the colors," Emma said quietly, adjusting Neptune's ring. Before she got sick, I wrote it down in my notebook so I wouldn't forget. Jack's throat tightened. She'd be real proud of how it turned out. Later that evening, after a dinner of mac and cheese, Emma's favorite, Jack stood in Emma's doorway, watching her get ready for bed. She'd arranged her stuffed animals just so, the way Sarah used to do it for her. "All tucked in?" he asked, sitting on the edge of her bed. Emma nodded, then asked, "Can we have pancakes on Saturday? With chocolate chips?" "You bet." Jack smoothed her hair back from her forehead, "just like Mom used to make. Mom would be proud of you, Daddy," Emma said suddenly, her blue eyes serious in her young face.
"She told me to take care of you, and I think I'm doing a good job."
Jack swallowed hard against the lump in his throat. "You're doing the best job, kiddo." After kissing her goodnight, Jack stood at her window, looking out at the flag still visible in the porch light's glow. The envelope felt heavy in his pocket, full of promise and possibility. "I hope so, kiddo," he murmured. "I hope so." Morning sunlight painted golden stripes across the dashboard of Jack's truck as he pulled into Randy's Donuts. The familiar red and white striped awning welcomed them, and Emma practically bounced in her seat with excitement. "Remember, this is our secret breakfast," Jack said, winking at his daughter. "Can't have your teacher knowing we're breaking the healthy breakfast rules." Emma giggled, her ponytail swinging. "I won't tell if you won't, Daddy." Inside the warm truck cab, they shared a box of fresh donuts, Emma carefully picking the sprinkles off her chocolate frosted one, while Jack stuck to his plain glazed. Powdered sugar dusted Emma's Navy school uniform, and Jack couldn't help but smile as she tried unsuccessfully to brush it away. "So after I deposit this check today, how about we celebrate with some ice cream after school?" Jack asked, holding up the envelope from yesterday. Emma's eyes lit up.
"Can we go to Mason's? They have the rainbow sprinkles."
"Mason's it is." Jack checked his watch. "All right, kiddo, time for school." After dropping Emma off, Jack drove through the quiet streets of Maplewood toward the community bank. The morning was crisp and clear, leaves dancing across the sidewalks in shades of red and gold. He found a parking spot right in front of the red brick building, its large windows reflecting the autumn sky. The bank's interior was warm and familiar, with its wood-paneled walls and worn marble floors. A line of 4 people stretched from the teller windows, and Jack took his place behind a young mother gently bouncing a baby against her shoulder. Mrs. Jenkins, the elderly teller with silver-rimmed glasses perpetually perched on her nose, smiled and waved from her window. She'd been working at the bank since Jack was Emma's age, and she still remembered to ask about his daughter every time he came in. Jack Reynolds. Laura Hayes, the bank manager, called out as she crossed the lobby. Her sensible heels clicked against the marble floor as she approached. "How's Emma doing?" Kelly mentioned she saw her at the fall festival last weekend. "She's good," Jack replied, shifting the envelope in his hands. "Won first prize in the pumpkin decorating contest. I saw that butterfly design she did. Very creative." Laura's warm brown eyes crinkled at the corners, just like her mother. Jack nodded, grateful for the simple acknowledgement of Sarah's memory. Laura had known them both for years, had sent food when Sarah was sick, had helped arrange the funeral flowers. Speaking of creative, Laura continued, "We're looking for volunteers for the Halloween carnival at the community center. Emma mentioned she might want to help with face painting. She's been practicing on her stuffed animals," Jack said with a small laugh. "I'll check her schedule and let you know." Laura smiled and headed back to her office, stopping to coo at the baby in front of Jack. The line moved forward slowly, the morning quiet broken only by the soft murmur of conversations and the whir of counting machines. Jack was just 2 people away from the counter when the crash came. The glass doors slammed open with such force that the security guard barely had time to reach for his radio before a masked man burst in, brandishing a pistol. "Everybody down! Now!" The shout echoed off the marble, sharp and violent in the peaceful morning air. Jack's combat training kicked in instantly. His perception narrowed. Time seemed to slow. He noted details with crystal clarity. Black mask, dark jacket, gloved hands. The way the gunman's right shoulder was tensed, finger already on the trigger. People screamed. The young mother in front of Jack froze, her baby starting to wail. Without thinking, Jack stepped forward, positioning himself between them and the gunman. His heart rate slowed, just like it used to in combat, the familiar calm of crisis washing over him. "I said down!" The robber swung his weapon in an arc, causing more screams. "All of you! Faces on the floor!" Jack kept his movements slow and deliberate as he helped the young mother lower herself and her baby safely to the ground. His mind was already calculating distances, angles, possible scenarios. The security guard was down, radio kicked away. Mrs. Jenkins had her hands up at her window, trembling but brave. The marble floor was cold against Jack's palms as he got down, keeping his head slightly raised to track the robber's movements. His breathing fell into the old rhythm. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The same pattern that had kept him steady during firefights and ambushes overseas. Every muscle in his body was coiled, ready. He could feel the old instincts humming through his veins, muscle memory from years of training rising to the surface. Time seemed to crystallize into perfect clarity as the robber approached the counter, weapon trained on Mrs. Jenkins' shaking hands. Jack's world narrowed to the space between heartbeats, between breaths. He waited, perfectly still, as the robber's boots clicked against the marble floor. The sound reminded him of another time, another place. Boots on concrete, the weight of body armor, the metallic taste of adrenaline. His mind was clear now, clearer than it had been in years. The fog of grief and routine that had clouded his days since Sarah's death burned away in the sharp focus of the moment. Every sense was heightened. He could hear the baby's whimpers, smell the lingering scent of coffee from the break room, feel each grain in the marble floor beneath his palms. The robber was shouting demands at Mrs. Jenkins now, his voice muffled behind the mask. Jack remained motionless, but every nerve was alive with awareness. He was back in that space where seconds stretched like hours, where every movement could mean life or death. This wasn't the sand-swept streets of Baghdad or the mountains of Afghanistan, but his body remembered. His muscles knew what to do, how to wait, when to move. The training that had kept him and his men alive through countless missions whispered through his blood like an old friend returning. The young mother next to him was trembling, whispering soothing words to her baby. Jack kept his body angled, maintaining his position as a shield between them and the threat. It was instinctive, this need to protect, the same instinct that had driven him through his military career, that now fueled his dedication to Emma. His breathing remained steady. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The robber's attention was fixed on the tellers, his back partially turned. Jack's mind calculated and recalculated, measuring distance, analyzing angles, watching for the moment when opportunity and necessity would meet. The bank lobby echoed with muffled sobs and harsh, ragged breathing as everyone lay face down on the cold marble floor. The polished stone felt like ice against Jack's cheek, but he kept his body perfectly still while his mind raced at lightning speed. Years of combat training kicked in automatically, his senses heightening as he assessed the situation through quick, careful glances from beneath lowered eyelids. The robber paced nervously behind the teller counter, his heavy work boots squeaking against the polished floor with each anxious step. His hands trembled violently as he pointed the gun, making the black metal weapon wave unsteadily through the air like a conductor's baton gone wild. "Empty the registers! Now! Move it!" His voice cracked with raw panic, the words tumbling out too fast and too high-pitched, betraying his complete inexperience with this kind of desperate act. Mrs. Jenkins worked as quickly as her arthritis-stiffened hands would allow, stuffing crumpled bills into a faded canvas bag with shaking fingers. Tears streamed down her deeply wrinkled cheeks as she fumbled repeatedly with the stubborn cash drawer, her wedding ring clicking against the metal handle. I'm trying, she whispered over and right. Itiwan dying, over. Her voice barely audible above the sound of rustling money and her own frightened breathing. Jack's trained eyes noticed every detail that mattered. The robber's breathing came in sharp, irregular bursts that spoke of pure terror rather than controlled determination. The man's stance was all wrong, weight shifted too far forward on his toes, grip way too tight on the weapon, making his knuckles white with strain. These were amateur mistakes that told Jack everything he needed to know about his opponent. This wasn't a professional job planned by someone who knew what he was doing. The guy was desperate, scared out of his mind, and that combination made him infinitely more dangerous than any hardened criminal. Faster! Come on! The robber shouted suddenly, his voice cracking like a teenager's, making everyone on the floor flinch in unison. He lunged forward and grabbed young Katie, the teenage teller with the bright pink nail polish, roughly by her thin arm. She cried out in sharp pain as he yanked her violently toward the massive steel vault door. "Open it! Open it now! I know you know the combination." Jack's muscles coiled tight as steel springs, every fiber of his being ready to explode into action. The robber's attention was divided now, split dangerously between Katie's terrified whimpering and the imposing vault that promised a bigger payoff. His gun hand had dropped slightly toward the floor, creating exactly the kind of opening Jack had been patiently waiting for. In one fluid, explosive motion, Jack launched himself forward like a missile. Years of intensive military training took over completely muscle memory, guiding each precise, calculated movement without conscious thought. His left hand clamped down hard on the robber's gun wrist, iron fingers digging into tendons as he forced the weapon up and safely away from any innocent targets. His right forearm drove like a battering ram into the man's exposed throat, cutting off both air and balance in one devastating strike. They crashed together against the marble counter with a bone-jarring impact that echoed through the lobby. The robber's finger squeezed reflexively on the trigger in his panic. The gun went off with a deafening crack that made everyone's ears ring. White-hot pain blazed like fire across Jack's left bicep as the bullet grazed his arm, but he didn't let go for even a split second. He twisted the weapon hard to the left, using pure leverage and momentum, exactly like he'd been taught in countless training sessions. The gun clattered to the floor with a metallic crash. The robber thrashed wildly underneath him like a trapped animal, but Jack had him locked in an iron grip that wouldn't budge. He swept the man's legs expertly, taking him down hard onto the unforgiving marble. In less than 5 seconds, Jack had him pinned face down with professional efficiency. One knee pressed firmly into his back, both arms twisted and locked behind him in a position that made resistance impossible. "Someone kick that gun away from him!" Jack ordered in his clear command voice, the one that had directed soldiers through combat zones. "Mr. Peterson," the nervous bank manager with the crooked tie, scrambled to comply immediately, his polished dress shoes sending the weapon skidding across the slick floor until it came to rest harmlessly against the far wall. People began rising shakily to their feet, like survivors of an earthquake, as police sirens wailed in the distance, growing steadily louder with each passing second. The bank lobby erupted in a mixture of relieved applause, grateful crying, and nervous laughter. Katie threw her arms around Mrs. Jenkins, both of them trembling like leaves in a storm, but alive and unharmed. Jack kept the robber pinned securely, his wounded arm beginning to throb with a dull, persistent ache where the bullet had grazed him. Warm blood seeped slowly through his cotton sleeve, staining the fabric dark red, but the wound was minor. He'd honestly had worse cuts shaving on busy mornings. His heart thundered in his chest like a war drum as the adrenaline that had carried him through the confrontation started to ebb away, leaving him feeling hollow and strangely detached. "Mrs. Jenkins approached him carefully, stepping around the scattered papers and overturned chairs, dabbing at her tear-filled eyes with a crumpled tissue from her purse. "You saved us, Jack," she whispered, her voice thick with overwhelming gratitude and unshed tears. "God bless you, son. God bless you." Police officers burst through the heavy glass doors like a SWAT team, weapons drawn and ready, their boots pounding against the marble. "On the ground. Everyone on the ground. Hands where we can see them." "It's okay," several people called out in unison, their voices overlapping with excitement. "He stopped the robber! He's a hero! The robber's already down!" The officers quickly took control of the chaotic situation, their training evident as they assessed the scene and cuffed the subdued robber with practiced efficiency. Jack finally released his iron hold and slumped back heavily against the cool marble counter, suddenly feeling completely exhausted. His hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the aftershock of violence, as the full weight of what had just happened settled over him like a heavy blanket. Jack watched in silence as the police led the masked man away in handcuffs, finally letting out the deep breath he felt like he'd been holding since this whole nightmare had started. He closed his eyes briefly, sending up a quick prayer of gratitude that it was over and nobody had been seriously hurt. When he opened them again, Mrs. Jenkins was already kneeling beside him, pressing a clean, lavender-scented handkerchief against his bleeding arm with the gentle, practiced touch of someone who had raised children and grandchildren. The bank lobby buzzed with excited conversation and nervous energy as uniformed. Officers moved efficiently through the crowd, taking detailed statements from every witness. Someone had called an ambulance for Jack's arm, despite his repeated protests that he was perfectly fine and didn't need any medical attention. He sat quietly on the cold floor, letting the paramedics clean and carefully bandage the shallow graze wound, while Mrs. Jenkins hovered nearby like a concerned mother hen, fussing over him with the kind of care that reminded him painfully of his own mother. Morning light spilled through the kitchen windows as Jack sipped his coffee, trying to ignore the animated voices coming from the TV. The local news station had been running the bank story non-stop since yesterday. And in case you're just joining us, the perky anchor announced, local veteran Jack Reynolds is being hailed as a hero after single-handedly stopping an armed robbery at Maplewood Community Bank yesterday morning. Emma sat at the kitchen table, practically bouncing in her chair as she spooned cereal into her mouth. Her eyes were glued to the grainy security camera footage showing Jack tackling the robber. "That's my dad," she exclaimed for probably the 10th time that morning. "Look how brave you were." Jack rubbed his bandaged arm where the bullet had grazed him. "It's not that big a deal, kiddo. Just did what anyone would do." "Nua," Emma protested. "Nobody else moved. You're like a real superhero." She paused, thoughtfully. "Does your arm still hurt?" "Barely feel it," Jack assured her, though the wound still stung. He'd refused anything stronger than Tylenol at the hospital, not wanting to worry Emma. The doorbell rang, making them both jump. Through the front window, Jack spotted a news van parked across the street. A reporter in a crisp blazer stood on their porch, cameraman in tow. "Oh boy," Jack muttered. "Emma, go finish getting ready for school, okay?" She nodded reluctantly and headed upstairs while Jack went to answer the door. "Mr. Reynolds." The Verd. Reporter's smile was bright enough to power a small city. "I'm Sarah Chen from Channel 5 News. We'd love to get your perspective on yesterday's events." "No comment," Jack said firmly but politely. "Just did what needed doing. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get my daughter to school." More reporters showed up throughout the morning. Jack kept the curtains drawn and ignored the repeated doorbell rings. Around 10, a familiar police cruiser pulled into the driveway, and Jack felt relief wash over him as he recognized Sheriff Tom Davis's weathered face through the window. "Tom." Jack greeted him at the door. "Come on in. Coffee?" "Wouldn't say no." The sheriff followed Jack to the kitchen, his boots clicking against the hardwood floors. He settled into a chair at the table while Jack poured him a mug. "Quite a circus out there," Tom remarked, nodding toward the window where another news van was slowly cruising past. Jack handed him the coffee and sat down across from him. "Yeah, well, small town. Guess they're desperate for excitement." "You did good yesterday, Jack." "Real good." The sheriff took a slow sip. "Could have gone real bad if you hadn't acted. Just training kicking in." Jack shrugged. "How's the guy doing?" "The robber?" "Marcus Tate," Tom said, setting down his mug. "He's cooling his heels in county lockup. Navy vet, apparently. Fell on hard times." Something about the name sent an ice-cold finger down Jack's spine. Marcus Tate. Why did it sound familiar? "You okay there?" Tom asked, noticing Jack's expression. "You went a little pale." Jack forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired. Still processing everything, I guess." They chatted a while longer about the case details and paperwork. After Tom left, Jack tried to shake off the nagging feeling about the robber's name, but it clung to him like a shadow. That evening, after Emma finished her homework and went upstairs to get ready for bed, Jack stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes. Steam rose from the hot water as he scrubbed, but his mind was elsewhere. Marcus Tate. The name kept echoing in his thoughts, like a half-remembered nightmare. Finally, he dried his hands and went to his home office. The old laptop hummed to life, and Jack typed Marcus Tate into the search bar. Several social media profiles popped up, but one caught his eye. A military service photo from about 15 years ago. Jack clicked the link, and his breath caught in his throat. The image showed a younger Marcus in desert camo, smiling with his unit. But what made Jack's blood run cold was the tattoo visible on the side of his neck. A black falcon with wings spread in flight, his hands trembling slightly. Jack opened his filing cabinet and pulled out a worn folder marked Tommy. Inside was the military report he'd memorized word for word over the years. The official account of his brother's death in Iraq. His eyes found the passage he'd read 1,000 times. Witness accounts described the insurgent leader as having distinctive markings, including a black falcon tattoo on the left side of the neck. Jack stared at the photo on his screen, then back at the report. The room seemed to tilt sideways as the impossible connection clicked into place. His coffee mug slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering on the floor. The man he'd tackled in the bank, the man now sitting in the county jail, had the same tattoo described in his brother's death report. Marcus Tate. The name that had been buried in military files, the face he'd imagined for 15 years while grief ate him alive. Jack gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white, as the truth crashed over him like a wave. He had just come face to face with the man responsible for his brother's death. The attic creaked under Jack's weight as he moved through the darkness, flashlight beam cutting through clouds of stirred-up dust. Sleep had eluded him for hours, his mind churning with half-formed memories and that haunting tattoo. He needed answers. In the far corner stood an olive-green footlocker, its metal surfaces dulled by years of storage. Jack's hands trembled slightly as he knelt before it, running his fingers over the worn stenciling. SGT. J. Reynolds. 3rd INF Div. The brass lock clicked open. The musty smell of old papers and fabric wafted up. Jack pushed aside his old uniforms, medals, and gear until he found what he was looking for. A weathered manila folder marked Operation Falcon Wing in faded black ink. His throat tightened as he opened it. Photos spilled onto the attic floor. There was Tommy, forever 23, grinning beneath his helmet. His brother's face was sun-bronzed and confident, blue eyes bright with that characteristic Reynolds optimism. Another showed their unit posed before a Humvee, arms around each other's shoulders. Jack's chest ached at the sight. But it was the incident report that drew his attention. The pages were crisp despite their age. He'd only read them once, when they'd first arrived with Tommy's effects. His eyes fixed on a familiar paragraph. During routine convoy operations, unit encountered heavy enemy fire. Corporal Thomas Reynolds KIA while engaging hostile forces. Primary suspect in coordinated ambush identified as Marcus Tate, local contractor. Status, presumed hostile. Warning, subject considered armed and dangerous. Jack's hands clenched, crumpling the paper's edges. The same man, the bank robber, was Tommy's killer. All these years, he'd imagined some nameless shadow, some faceless enemy. But now, that shadow had form, had a name, had been right there in front of him. He grabbed his keys and jacket, barely registering the pre-dawn darkness as he drove to the police station. The squad room was quiet, lit only by fluorescent overheads and computer screens. Sheriff Davis looked up from his desk, surprise crossing his weathered features. "Jack, it's not even 5 a.m. What's wrong?" "I need to see him." Jack's voice was tight. Marcus Tate. Now, the sheriff's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Hold on there. You know I can't just—" Jack slapped the old report onto Davis's desk. "Read it. That man killed my brother in Iraq, 15 years ago. I need to talk to him." Davis scanned the document, his frown deepening. "Jack, listen to me. Even if this is the same person, and that's a big if, I can't let you near him. You're the victim in an active investigation. Tom, please." Jack leaned forward, knuckles white against the desk edge. "I've waited 15 years for answers. He's right there, in your cells, just 5 minutes. And what exactly do you plan to do in those 5 minutes?" Davis stood, his voice gentle but firm. "Look at yourself, Jack. You're running on no sleep and a lot of anger. That's not a combination I'm willing to risk. I have a right to know. You have a right to justice." Davis cut in. And you'll get it through proper channels. Go home. Be with Emma. Let me handle this. Jack's jaw clenched. He wanted to argue, to demand, to make the sheriff understand. But Davis was right about one thing. He wasn't thinking clearly. The rage, bubbling beneath his skin, scared even him. Without another word, he snatched up the report and stormed out. The drive home passed in a blur of streetlights and memories. Tommy's laugh, his last letter home, the folded flag at his funeral. The house was quiet when he returned, dawn just beginning to paint the sky. Jack moved to the living room, where Tommy's flag sat in its triangle case on the mantel. He picked it up, fingers tracing the wooden edges. "Daddy?" He turned to find Emma in her pajamas, hair mussed from sleep. Her small face creased with worry as she took in his expression. "Are you okay, Daddy?" Jack looked down at the flag in his hands, at all it represented: loss, sacrifice, a brother who would never come home. His voice was rough when he answered, "Not yet, sweetheart." The early morning light caught the tears in Emma's eyes as she wrapped her arms around his waist, holding him tight. Jack held the flag in one hand and his daughter with the other, wondering how he could explain that sometimes even heroes carried burdens too heavy to bear alone. The fluorescent lights of the Maplewood police station buzzed overhead as Jack shifted in the hard plastic chair of the waiting area. 2 days of sleepless nights had left dark circles under his eyes. His statement about the bank robbery sat half-finished on the clipboard in his lap, just an excuse to get inside. Sheriff Davis emerged from his office, coffee mug in hand, and spotted Jack. The older man's weathered face creased with concern. "Back again, Reynolds?" "Need to finish my statement," Jack said, keeping his voice steady. "Thought of some details I left out." Davis studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "You're not here about the robbery, are you, son?" Jack met his gaze. "Please, Tom. 5 minutes." The sheriff ran a hand through his gray hair. "Against my better judgment." He gestured for Jack to follow. "Keep it civil, or I'll have you out faster than you can blink." They walked down a narrow hallway lined with holding cells. Jack's boots echoed against the linoleum floor. Each step felt heavier than the last as Davis led him to the visitors' area, a small room divided by thick glass, with phones on either side for communication. 5 minutes, Davis repeated firmly. Jack nodded, taking a seat at the partition. His heart hammered against his ribs as a door opened on the other side. 2 deputies escorted Marcus Tate into view. Marcus looked different from the bank, smaller somehow, deflated. A purple bruise bloomed across his left cheekbone, and his orange jumpsuit hung loose on his frame. He moved stiffly, favoring his right side where Jack had taken him down. Their eyes met through the glass. Recognition flickered across Marcus's face, followed by something deeper. Was it fear? Shame? Jack couldn't tell, but it made his blood boil either way. Marcus sank into the chair opposite Jack. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the phone. Jack grabbed his receiver, knuckles white around the plastic. "You're Tommy's brother," Marcus said softly, his voice scratchy through the line. The words hit Jack like a physical blow. Hearing his brother's name from this man's lips sent a surge of rage through his body. He gripped the phone tighter, willing himself to stay seated. "I didn't kill him," Marcus continued, leaning forward. "You have to know." "Don't." Jack cut him off, his voice deadly quiet. "Don't you dare say his name. Please, just listen." "Listen?" Jack's control snapped. He slammed his fist on the metal counter, making the glass rattle. "You murdered him. You killed my little brother." Marcus flinched but didn't look away. "That's not what happened. Tommy was." "Shut up!" Jack roared, surging to his feet. The chair clattered behind him as he struck the partition again. "You don't get to talk about him. You don't get to pretend." Strong hands grabbed his shoulders. Sheriff Davis and a deputy pulled him back while another officer hustled Marcus away from the glass. Jack struggled against their grip, 15 years of buried grief and rage pouring out of him. "Get him out of here," Davis ordered. They half-walked, half-dragged Jack down the hallway. His chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath, tried to cage the animal that had broken loose inside him. By the time they reached the lobby, he'd stopped resisting. Go home, Jack, Davis said firmly. Cool off. Don't make me regret letting you in here. Jack yanked free of their hold and stormed out into the parking lot. The cold November air hit his face, but he barely felt it. His hand shook as he fumbled with his truck keys. Inside the cab, he gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. His brother's face flashed through his mind. Tommy's easy smile, his unwavering faith, his final letter home talking about doing what was right, no matter the cost. The memories twisted like knives in Jack's gut. A knock on his window made him jump. Reverend Samuel Miller stood outside, his kind face etched with concern. Jack hadn't even noticed the pastor's car in the lot. Slowly, Jack rolled down his window. Evening, Reverend. Marcus asked me to tell you something, Miller said gently. There's more to your brother's story. The words hung in the frigid air between them as Jack stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. The night pressed in around his truck, dark and heavy, with secrets he wasn't sure he was ready to hear. The morning sun cast long shadows across Jack's front porch as Reverend Miller's old station wagon pulled into the driveway. Jack watched from the kitchen window, his coffee growing cold in his hands. Emma sat at the breakfast table, spooning the last of her cereal while humming a tune. Time for school, kiddo, Jack said, forcing a smile. Mrs. Patterson will be here any minute for carpool. Emma gathered her backpack and lunchbox, then paused at the door. Is everything okay, Daddy? You barely touched your toast. Just grown-up stuff, Jack replied, smoothing her hair. Nothing for you to worry about. The doorbell chimed. Emma hugged her father quickly and bounced out the door with her usual energy. Through the window, Jack watched her climb into Mrs. Patterson's minivan, waving until the vehicle disappeared around the corner. Reverend Miller stood patiently on the porch, his kind face weathered by years of listening to others' burdens. Jack opened the door, noting the manila envelope tucked under the pastor's arm. Coffee? Jack offered, more out of habit than hospitality. That would be nice, thank you. Miller followed him into the kitchen, settling into a chair at the worn oak table where Emma had sat moments before. Jack busied himself with the coffee pot, his back turned to his visitor. If you're here about Marcus Tate, I am, Miller said quietly, and I think you need to hear what I have to say. Jack set a steaming mug in front of the Reverend and sat down heavily across from him. With all due respect, sir, I read the military report. I know what happened to my brother. Miller took a careful sip of coffee. Reports don't always tell the whole story, Jack. Marcus spent 3 hours talking to me yesterday. What he shared. The pastor paused, choosing his words carefully. It's not what you think. Then what is it? Then what is it? Jack's voice came out harsher than intended. Tommy didn't die fighting Marcus, Miller said softly. He died saving him and his entire squad. Jack's hand tightened around his mug. That's impossible. The report clearly stated that Marcus's unit was presumed hostile. Yes. Miller nodded. But that's because communication was down. They were pinned down by enemy fire, half their squad wounded. Tommy's unit was ordered to protect the convoy, to keep moving. But your brother, the pastor's eyes grew distant. Your brother saw them in trouble and made a choice. What choice? Jack whispered. He broke formation, led his team to provide covering fire so Marcus's squad could retreat. He personally carried 2 wounded men to safety. Miller's voice grew thick. The last thing Marcus saw was Tommy providing suppressing fire so the others could escape. When the dust settled, Jack pushed back from the table, pacing the kitchen. No, that's not. Tommy wouldn't disobey orders. He was by the book, always. Except when it came to saving lives, Miller said gently. Marcus said Tommy told him something just before that final push. He said, sometimes doing right means breaking rules. Jack froze. The words hit him like a physical blow. They were exactly the kind of thing Tommy would say, had said many times before. Marcus has carried this weight for 15 years, Miller continued. The guilt of God, surviving when Tommy didn't, of watching another man die to save him. The pastor reached for the manila envelope. He asked me to give you something. From the envelope, Miller withdrew a scratched and tarnished dog tag. The metal caught the morning light as he placed it on the table between them. Jack's hands trembled as he picked it up. The engraving was worn but still legible. Reynolds, Thomas J. Catholic Opaz. Marcus has kept it all this time, Miller explained. Said he couldn't bear to send it back, knowing how much your family blamed him, but he also couldn't let it go. It was his reminder of the price of his second chance. Jack sank back into his chair, turning the dog tag over and over in his palm. He recognized the small nick in the corner. Tommy had caught it on a fence during training and joked about it being his lucky scratch. "If you didn't kill my brother," Jack's voice cracked, "then who did?" Miller reached across the table and placed his hand on Jack's shoulder. "There first. War killed your brother, Jack, the same war that's still killing Marcus inside. The same war you're fighting in your heart every day." Jack stared at the dog tag long after Miller left, the metal warm in his palm. The morning light shifted across the kitchen floor, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled. Each chime seemed to echo Tommy's last words. Sometimes doing right means breaking rules. The dream came like a sandstorm, sudden and fierce. Jack found himself back in Iraq, the heat pressing against his skin like a heavy blanket. Though he hadn't been there that day, his mind painted the scene from countless readings of the mission report and Tommy's last letters. The desert sun blazed overhead, harsh and unforgiving. Dust kicked up from military vehicles as Tommy's unit moved through the narrow streets of a small village. Jack could see his younger brother clearly now, 23 years old, rifle held steady, eyes alert beneath his helmet. The other soldiers followed close behind, their boots crunching on loose gravel. "Keep it tight," Tommy called out, his voice echoing in Jack's dream memory. "Stay alert." The village seemed deserted, windows shuttered, doors closed. Only the wind spoke, whistling between empty buildings. Through the haze of the dream, Jack watched as Tommy signaled his men forward. They moved like shadows through the dusty street. Then came the crack of gunfire. "Contact left!" someone shouted. The air erupted with bullets and screams. The scene shifted, fragments clicking together like broken glass. Marcus's unit was pinned down in a nearby alley, taking heavy fire. Jack saw Marcus clearly now. Younger, uniform covered in dust, blood seeping from a wound in his leg. 2 of his men were already down. Tommy's radio crackled. "Hold position, do not engage, return to base immediately." But Tommy was already moving. Jack wanted to cry out, to stop him, knowing what came next. But this was a memory set in stone, unchangeable as the desert itself. "Cover me," Tommy shouted to his team. He sprinted across the open street, bullets kicking up dirt around his feet. He reached Marcus's position, grabbed him by his vest. "I've got you, brother. Stay with me." The firefight intensified. Tommy's men provided covering fire as he half-carried, half-dragged Marcus toward safety. Other wounded soldiers stumbled behind them, supported by their comrades. Tommy's face was determined, focused only on getting everyone out. They were almost clear when the RPG streaked through the air. The explosion filled Jack's dream with white light and thunder. He saw Tommy's last moment, not facing an enemy, but shielding Marcus from the blast. The scene fractured, spinning away into darkness. Jack jolted awake, sheets tangled around him, heart hammering against his ribs. Moonlight filtered through his bedroom window. The clock read 3:47 a.m. He was saving him, Jack whispered into the darkness. His voice cracked. Tommy was saving. The realization sat heavy in his chest. For 15 years, he'd carried an image of his brother dying in combat against an enemy. But the truth was different. Tommy had died as he lived, putting others first, refusing to leave anyone behind. Jack swung his legs over the side of the bed, knowing sleep wouldn't return. He padded downstairs, careful not to wake Emma. In the kitchen drawer, he found Tommy's dog tag that Reverend Miller had given him. The metal felt cool against his palm as he stepped out onto the front porch. The night was giving way to pre-dawn gray. Jack settled into the old wooden rocker, turning the dog tag over and over in his hands. The engraved letters caught what little light there was. Reynolds, Thomas J. The edges were worn smooth, as if someone had held it often, maybe seeking forgiveness. Marcus had carried this piece of Tommy for 15 years, not as a trophy, but as a reminder, a burden of gratitude he could never repay. The sky lightened gradually, stars fading as pink and orange crept along the horizon. Jack watched the sunrise paint the world in gentle colors, so different from the harsh desert light in his dream. Birds began their morning songs in the maple trees lining his street. When the sun finally cleared the horizon, Jack went inside and picked up his phone. He found Sheriff Davis's number and pressed call, watching the morning light stream through his kitchen window. The sheriff answered on the third ring, voice rough with sleep. "Jack, everything okay? Tom, I need to see Marcus again." Jack's voice was steady now. "Certain. There are things we need to talk about." "This? About Tommy?" The sheriff's tone softened with understanding. "Yes." Jack ran his thumb over the dog tag one more time. "I think I'm finally ready to hear the whole story." Jack stood in the county jail's visiting area, his boots heavy on the concrete floor. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects, casting harsh shadows across the metal tables bolted to the ground. The air smelled of disinfectant and desperation. Marcus sat across from him in an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his gaunt frame, shoulders slumped forward like a man carrying the weight of the world. His hands were folded on the table, knuckles scarred and weathered. "I didn't expect you to come back," Marcus said quietly, his voice rough with exhaustion and something that might have been gratitude. Jack pulled out the metal chair, its legs scraping against the floor with a sound that echoed off the concrete walls. The noise seemed to pierce the heavy silence that hung between them. "I need to know everything, from the beginning." His voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of the table. Marcus nodded slowly, running his fingers through his unkempt hair. Gray streaked through the brown now, making him look older than his 38 years. "After that day in Iraq, after Tommy." He paused, swallowing hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him running toward us, taking those bullets that were meant for my unit. The sound of gunfire, the dust, the way he looked at me right before." Jack's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. His brother's face flashed in his mind. Young, determined, always ready to help others. But he remained silent, forcing himself to listen. "When I got home, the nightmares followed me like shadows," Marcus continued, his eyes fixed on his hands. 3-4 times a night I'd wake up screaming. My neighbors complained. The VA prescribed pills, but they just made everything fuzzy. Couldn't think straight. Couldn't hold down a job. Lost 3 different positions in 6 months. The visiting room felt smaller now, the walls pressing in. Jack could hear the distant murmur of other conversations, other broken families trying to piece themselves back together. "My wife left, took our daughter Sarah. With her." Marcus's voice cracked like old leather. "Said she couldn't watch me destroy myself anymore. Said Sarah needed a father, not a ghost." He looked up at Jack then, his eyes hollow with regret. "She was right. I was already dead inside. Just hadn't figured out how to stop breathing yet." Jack felt something twist in his chest. The pain in Marcus's voice was too real, too familiar. He'd felt that same hollow emptiness after losing his wife, that sense of being adrift in a world that had moved on without him. Then last year, Sarah got diagnosed with leukemia. The words fell like stones into still water. 10 years old, same as your Emma. Bright kid. Loves to read, just like her old man used to. Marcus's hands shook as he pressed them flat against the table. The doctors said it was aggressive, fast-moving, but treatable, if we could afford the right care. Jack flinched at the mention of his daughter's name, at the parallel Marcus was drawing between their children. The medical bills. Marcus's voice cracked completely now. $60,000 for the first round of chemotherapy. Insurance wouldn't cover the experimental treatments. Said they were investigational, like my little girl's life was some kind of science project. He pressed his palms against his eyes, shoulders shaking. "I tried everything legal first. Worked 3 jobs. cleaning offices at night, loading trucks, whatever paid cash. Took out loans against everything I owned. Even sold my car, my guitar, my grandfather's watch. The silence stretched between them, thick with shared pain. Jack could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, could feel the weight of every choice that had led them both to this moment. But it wasn't enough. She was getting worse, and Marcus dropped his hands, revealing red-rimmed eyes filled with desperate shame. I started small, shoplifting medicine from pharmacies. Then bigger stuff. Electronics I could fence. Anything with value. Told myself it was temporary. Just until Sarah got better. Jack watched this broken man across from him and saw something he didn't want to recognize. A father's love, twisted into something desperate and dark. How far would he go for Emma? How many lines would he cross if she were dying? The bank. Marcus's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. That was supposed to be my last job. One big score. Enough money to pay for her next round of treatment and maybe buy me enough time to find another way. He laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the sterile room. $43,000. That's what I thought her life was worth. $43,000 and my soul. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in stark relief. Jack could see every line of exhaustion on Marcus's face, every shadow of regret that had carved itself into his features. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Jack, Marcus continued, his voice steady now despite the tears tracking down his cheeks. I don't deserve it. What I did, turning to crime, threatening innocent people, walking into that bank with a gun, that's on me. I made those choices. I let the guilt and the fear and the desperation turn me into something Tommy never would have recognized. Jack's hands clenched into fists under the table, nails digging into his palms. The anger was still there, but it felt different now, less pure, contaminated with understanding he didn't want to feel. But Tommy. Marcus's eyes met Jack's, red-rimmed but steady, holding his gaze with effort. Your brother died saving us. He broke protocol, ran straight into enemy fire to pull my guys out of that ambush. The radio was screaming retreat orders, but Tommy looked at us. Trapped, outnumbered, scared kids, most of us. And he made a choice. Marcus leaned forward slightly, the chains around his wrists rattling softly against the metal table. He knew what he was doing, knew the odds, but he grabbed his rifle anyway and laid down covering fire. While we scrambled to safety, took 3 bullets meant for us. He chose to be a hero, Jack. Chose it like it was the easiest decision in the world. Jack's throat felt tight, his vision blurring slightly. He could picture it so clearly. Tommy with that stubborn set to his jaw. The same expression he'd worn as a kid when he'd decided to stand up to bullies twice his size. And you chose to become a criminal, Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. Yeah, Marcus nodded without hesitation, shame evident in every line of his face. I did. I let the guilt eat me alive. Couldn't sleep, couldn't pray, couldn't look at my own reflection without seeing a coward, couldn't live up to Tommy's sacrifice, couldn't be the man he died saving. He leaned forward again, his voice growing urgent. But there's something you should know. Something Tommy told me right before he. Marcus's voice wavered, broke, then steadied with visible effort. He was lying there, bleeding out, and he grabbed my arm, made me lean down close, said, tell my brother Jack that sometimes the hardest part isn't dying for something, it's living for it. Jack felt like he'd been punched in the gut, the air rushing out of his lungs. Those words, they sounded exactly like something Tommy would say. Tommy, who'd always been the wise one despite being younger. Tommy, who'd seen meaning where others saw only chaos. I failed him, Marcus continued, his voice breaking with the weight of 15 years of carried guilt. Failed myself, failed my daughter, failed every person I threatened or stole from. He wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand, the orange jumpsuit riding up to reveal more scars on his wrists. If you see Emma, tell her something for me. Tell her, not all soldiers come home heroes. Some of us, we just try to live with our mistakes. Try to be fathers, even when we've forgotten how to be men. Jack stared at the scarred surface of the metal table, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. The rage he'd carried for 15 years, nursed and fed and kept alive like a sacred flame, collided with an unwanted wave of compassion. This broken man before him wasn't the monster he'd imagined all these years. He was just another wounded soldier who'd lost his way, another father trying to save his child and failing in the worst possible way. The visiting room felt heavy with unspoken grief, with the weight of choices made and lives altered. Jack could hear other conversations around them, wives talking to husbands, mothers visiting sons, all of them trying to bridge the gap between love and disappointment. "Your daughter," Jack said finally, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite name. "Sarah, how is she?" Marcus's face crumpled like paper, all pretense of composure falling away. "The doctors give her 6 months without the treatment, maybe less. Her hair's all gone now from the chemo she did get. She draws pictures of herself with long hair, the way she used to look." His voice caught. "I can't even see her now. My ex-wife won't bring her to visit. Says she doesn't want Sarah to remember me like this." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of a father's love turned into a father's worst nightmare. Jack thought of Emma. Bright, laughing Emma, with her gap-toothed smile, and her endless questions about everything. What would he do if she were sick? How far would he go? How many laws would he break? Jack stood up abruptly, the chair squealing against the floor like a wounded animal. He couldn't take any more. It was too much. The grief, the anger, the unexpected weight of empathy pressing down on his chest like a physical thing. The walls of the visiting room felt like they were closing in, the fluorescent lights too bright, the air too thin. "I have to go," he managed, his voice barely more than a whisper. Marcus nodded, understanding in his tired eyes. There was no anger there, no resentment at being abandoned again, just acceptance. "Thank you for listening, Jack. That's more than I deserved." More kindness than I've seen in a long time. Jack walked out of the visiting area, each step feeling heavier than the last. His boots echoed in the corridor, the sound bouncing off concrete walls painted institutional green. The guard buzzed him through security, the electronic lock disengaging with a harsh click that seemed to echo in his chest. He moved through the process mechanically, retrieving his wallet, his keys, his watch, all the small pieces of the outside world that they'd held for him. When he emerged into the late afternoon sun, the brightness hit him like a physical blow. The world outside seemed too vivid, too alive after the sterile confines of the jail. Cars moved along the street. People walked by with shopping bags and coffee cups, all of them living their normal lives, while his own world had been turned upside down once again. Reverend Miller stood waiting in the parking lot, 2 paper cups of coffee in his hands. The older man's kind eyes took in Jack's troubled expression, reading the storm of emotions written across his face like words on a page. Without speaking, he held out one of the cups. "Forgiveness is harder than war, isn't it?" the pastor said quietly, his voice gentle but carrying the weight of his own experiences. Jack took the offered coffee, its warmth failing to reach the cold knot that had formed in his chest. The liquid was bitter, but he barely tasted it. He stared at the prison's brick walls, thinking of the broken man inside, thinking of 2 little girls. Emma with her bright smile, and Sarah with her crayon drawings of the hair she'd lost. 2 children caught in the wake of their father's choices, their lives shaped by the echoes of a battlefield half a world away, and the impossible weight of love turned desperate. The evening sun painted long shadows across Jack's living room as he sat with Reverend Miller on the worn, leather couch. Steam rose from their coffee mugs, and the pastor's gentle voice filled the quiet space. "Marcus has been asking about Emma," Miller said, warming his hands around his mug. He mentioned his own daughter is about her age. Jack shifted uncomfortably. "I don't want Emma mixed up in all this. She's already part of it, Jack. She's your daughter, and this is affecting you deeply." From the hallway, Emma's small figure lingered just out of sight, her sock-covered feet silent on the hardwood floor as she listened, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. "I just can't understand it, Miller," Jack said, running a hand through his graying hair. "How do I tell her that the man I stopped at the bank is connected to her uncle's death? That he was there when Tommy—" His voice trailed off. "Maybe you don't have to explain everything," Miller suggested. Children often understand more than we give them credit for. They see with their hearts, not their scars. Emma pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear more. Her father's voice had that same sadness it got when he talked about her mom or Uncle Tommy. Marcus isn't some monster, Miller continued. He's a broken man who made terrible choices, but he's still human, still capable of redemption. The floor creaked under Emma's foot, and both men turned. She stepped into the living room, her face serious beyond her years. Emma, Jack said softly, you should be getting ready for bed. I heard you talking about the man from the bank, she said, climbing onto the couch between them. Is he sad like you were after Mommy died? Jack exchanged a look with Miller, then pulled Emma close. It's complicated, sweetheart. Nothing's that complicated, Daddy, she said with a simple wisdom of childhood. When I'm sad, letters from my friends make me feel better. Miller smiled warmly. Out of the mouths of babes. Later that night, Jack tucked Emma into bed, pulling her flower print comforter up to life, her chin. Her room glowed softly under the star-shaped nightlight, casting gentle shadows on the walls covered with her artwork. Daddy? She asked as he kissed her forehead. Can I write him a letter? Maybe he needs a friend. Jack paused, his hand resting on her shoulder. Every instinct told him to protect her, to keep her far from this situation. But looking into her earnest brown eyes, he saw something he'd been missing. The pure, uncomplicated compassion that children possess. You really want to write to him? Emma nodded eagerly. You always say being kind is important, even when it's hard. Jack felt a familiar ache in his chest. She sounded so much like Tommy sometimes. His brother had always believed in second chances, too. All right, he said finally. You can write him a letter tomorrow. Emma's face lit up. Can I write it now, please? Jack glanced at the clock. 8:45 p.m. 10 minutes, he conceded, watching as she scrambled out of bed to her small desk. She pulled out her favorite paper, the kind with rainbow borders, and her special colored pencils. Jack sat on the edge of her bed, watching as she bent over the paper, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. Dear Mr. Marcus, she read aloud as she wrote, Daddy says you were a soldier like Uncle Tommy. She looked up at Jack. Is that okay to say? He nodded, throat tight. Emma continued writing, speaking softly as her pencil moved across the paper. I think he'd want you to feel better. Sometimes when I'm sad, I look at the sunrise and remember that every day is a new beginning. She reached for her yellow and orange-colored pencils, carefully drawing a bright sunrise at the bottom of the page. The simple beauty of it, rays of hope spreading across the paper, made Jack's eyes burn with unexpected tears. Should I sign it your friend, Emma? She asked. That's perfect, Jack managed to say. She finished with a flourish, folding the paper carefully and sliding it into an envelope. Can we give it to him tomorrow? We'll give it to Reverend Miller at church, Jack said, helping her back into bed. He can take it to Marcus. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of Maplewood Community Church. Emma sat beside Jack in their usual pew, the letter clutched in her hands throughout the service. She barely paid attention to the sermon, her eyes fixed on Reverend Miller at the pulpit. After the final hymn, as the congregation filed out, Emma tugged Jack's sleeve. Now, Daddy. They waited until most people had left, then approached Miller in the empty sanctuary. Emma held out the envelope shyly. This is for Mr. Marcus, she said, to help him feel less sad. Miller knelt down to her level, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. That's very thoughtful of you, Emma. I'm sure it will mean a lot to him. Jack slipped the letter into the pastor's hand, their eyes meeting in a moment of understanding. Miller nodded slightly, tucking the envelope into his Bible. You raised quite a remarkable young lady, Miller said softly. Jack watched Emma skip down the church steps ahead of them, her Sunday dress swishing around her knees. She gets it from her mother, he said, and Tommy. They both had that same kind of heart. The autumn days rolled by like leaves tumbling across Jack's front yard. 1 week stretched into normalcy. each morning bringing familiar routines that helped dull the sharp edges of memory. Jack found comfort in the rhythm, the clink of coffee cups at breakfast, Emma's backpack zipping up before school, the steady hum of engines at the garage. At work, Hank had stopped giving him those worried looks. "You seem different," he mentioned one afternoon as they changed the oil in Mrs. Peterson's sedan. "More at peace, maybe." Jack just nodded, focusing on the task at hand. The truth was, he did feel different. The weight he'd carried for 15 years had shifted somehow, like a boulder that had finally found a stable place to rest. Emma's schedule kept them busy. Ballet on Tuesdays, science club on Thursdays. Jack sat in the back of the school auditorium during her class presentation about butterflies, watching her gesture excitedly about metamorphosis. Her enthusiasm reminded him of Tommy, how his brother could find wonder in the smallest things. On Wednesday morning, Reverend Miller stopped by during breakfast with an envelope. Emma's eyes lit up when she saw her name written in careful block letters. "Can I read it now, Daddy?" she asked, already sliding her finger under the flap. Jack hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead, sweetheart." Emma unfolded the paper and cleared her throat importantly. "Dear Emma, thank you for your beautiful letter and drawing. The sunrise you drew reminded me of my daughter, Lily. She's 8 years old and loves to draw too. Your kind words made me feel less alone. Your Uncle Tommy was one of the bravest men I ever knew. He saved many lives, including mine. I wish I could have told him thank you. I hope you keep drawing sunrises. They remind us that every day is a chance to start fresh." Your friend, Marcus. Emma looked up from the letter, her face glowing. "Can I write back?" Jack felt something shift in his chest, like a door opening to let in fresh air. "Sure, kiddo." Over the next few weeks, more letters arrived. Emma wrote about school, her ballet recital, and the stray cat that visited their porch. Marcus replied with stories about Lily's favorite books and her collection of seashells from when they lived near the coast. The letters were simple, honest things. No mention of war or guilt or prison walls. Just two children sharing pieces of their worlds, building a bridge of words between them. One evening, Jack found Emma at the kitchen table, surrounded by colored pencils and paper. "What are you working on?" he asked, setting down his keys. "A picture for Lily," Emma said, adding careful details to what looked like a garden. "Marcus said she's in the hospital again. I thought this might make her room prettier." Jack stood there, watching his daughter's small hands create beauty meant to comfort another child's pain. His own heart ached, but differently now, not with anger, but with something that felt like hope. The final letter arrived on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Jack sat in his favorite chair while Emma played upstairs. The envelope felt heavier than usual. "Dear Jack and Emma," it began. "The doctor says Lily is getting stronger. Your drawings, Emma, make her smile every day. She hangs them where she can see them from her bed. But what helps most is knowing Tommy's family has found it in their hearts to forgive me. I've carried his memory like a weight all these years. Now it feels more like a blessing, a reminder that good people exist, and that grace is real. I don't deserve your kindness, but I'm grateful for it. It's given me peace I never thought I'd find. Thank you, Marcus." Jack lowered the letter, aware of Emma watching him from the doorway. She'd gotten so tall lately, so wise in her own quiet way. "You okay, Daddy?" He smiled, really smiled, for what felt like the first time in years. "Yeah, sweetheart. I think maybe we both needed to heal." Emma crossed the room and curled up in his lap, just like when she was smaller. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Nature's own version of Emma's sunrise drawings, offering promise of another tomorrow. Rain pelted against the kitchen windows as Jack and Emma worked side by side at the counter, preparing their Friday night dinner. Steam rose from a pot of boiling pasta while Emma carefully torn lettuce leaves for a salad. The comfortable routine of their evening felt peaceful, normal. "Did you remember to add salt to the water?" Emma asked, glancing at the pot with the authority of someone who had watched too many cooking shows. Jack chuckled. "Yes, chef, just like you taught me." The phone's sharp ring cut through their conversation. Jack wiped his hands on a dish towel and reached for it. expecting Hank calling about tomorrow's work schedule. Jack Reynolds, he answered, stirring the pasta with his free hand. Jack. Reverend Miller's voice came through, shaky and urgent. You need to come to street. Mary's hospital right away. The wooden spoon clattered against the stovetop. What happened?
It's Marcus.
The Reverend's voice cracked. He tried to take his own life after they denied his parole. They found him in his cell. Jack's throat went dry. The kitchen suddenly felt too warm, too bright. Is he? He's alive, but it's serious. I think you should be here. Emma looked up from her lettuce, worry creasing her young face. Daddy? What's wrong? Jack forced his voice to stay steady. Nothing, sweetheart. I need to go help someone. He turned back to the phone. I'll be there as soon as I can get Mrs. Patterson to watch Emma. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur. Jack called their elderly neighbor, threw on his jacket, and kissed Emma's forehead. Be good for Mrs. Patterson, okay? There's someone who needs help. Is it Mr. Marcus? Emma asked quietly. Jack paused at the door, rain drumming against the porch roof. Yes, honey. He's sick and needs friends right now. Tell him I'm praying for him. Jack's chest tightened as he nodded and stepped out into the storm. The hospital corridors felt endless as Jack followed a nurse's directions to the ICU. His boots squeaked against the polished floor, leaving wet tracks. The sharp scent of antiseptic burned his nostrils. Sheriff Davis stood outside one of the rooms, his usual commanding presence somewhat deflated. He straightened when he saw Jack approach. Thanks for coming, the sheriff said, his voice gruff with emotion. They've got him stabilized, but... He gestured through the window. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Marcus lay motionless on the hospital bed, pale as the sheets around him. Tubes and wires connected him to softly beeping machines. The sight hit Jack harder than he expected. This broken man who had become so tangled in his life story. They found this in his cell. Sheriff Davis said quietly, holding out an envelope. It's addressed to you. Jack took the envelope with trembling fingers. His name was written in Marcus's careful handwriting on the front. I'll give you some privacy, the sheriff said, stepping away. Jack sank into a chair in the dimly lit waiting area. The envelope felt heavy in his hands, weighted with unspoken words. He took a deep breath and opened it. Dear Jack, by the time you read this, I hope I've finally paid for what happened to Tommy. Not just for surviving when he didn't, but for throwing away the second chance he died to give me. I wanted you to know the truth about that day. All of it. Your brother was the bravest man I ever knew. When our unit got pinned down, he could have followed orders and saved himself. Instead, he came back for us, for me. His last words to me were, "Get them home." I've carried those words like stones in my heart for 15 years. I tried to honor him when I came home, but the nightmares wouldn't stop. The guilt ate at me until I couldn't hold a job or look my own daughter in the eye. I started taking risks, desperate for money, when Lily got sick. I became everything Tommy died trying to prevent. Your daughter's letters these past weeks were the first pure kindness I've known since that day in the desert. She has Tommy's heart, seeing good in broken things. Tell her thank you for being my friend when I least deserved it. And thank you, Jack, for letting her show me that grace was still possible. I'm sorry. I couldn't be strong enough to accept it. Tell your brother I'm sorry, and thank you for giving me one last friend. Marcus Jack lowered the letter, his vision blurring. Through the window, he could see Marcus's chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The man who had been his enemy, then his daughter's pen pal, now lay fighting for the life he'd tried to throw away. Standing slowly, Jack walked to Marcus's bedside. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the silence. Outside, rain continued to fall, washing the world clean. You're not done yet, soldier, Jack whispered. The morning sun filtered through the hospital blinds, casting thin stripes of light across Marcus's pale face. Jack stood in the doorway, his hand gripping the frame as he watched the steady rise and fall of Marcus's chest. The room smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. A half-empty cup sat on the bedside table next to a vase of wilting flowers, probably from Reverend Miller. Marcus's eyes fluttered open, squinting against the light. When he noticed Jack, his shoulders tensed, then sagged with what looked like resignation. The bandages around his wrists were stark white against his skin. "Didn't expect to see you here," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. Jack pulled up a plastic chair and sat down. The legs scraped against the linoleum floor. "Didn't expect to be here," he admitted, "but here we are." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the steady beep of the heart monitor. Jack studied Marcus's face, the dark circles under his eyes, the stubble on his jaw, the way his fingers kept fidgeting with the hospital blanket. "Why'd you do it?" Jack finally asked. The question came out softer than he'd intended. Marcus turned his head toward the window, blinking rapidly. Couldn't take it anymore. The guilt, the shame. His voice cracked. "My little girl. Your daughter?" Jack leaned forward. "The one Emma's been writing to? And one Mene. My con. In the cum. And one Mene one. With one Mene one. Emma's been writing to. My little girl. And one Mene one. And one Mene one. Emma's been writing to." Marcus nodded, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks. "Lily. She's 8. Has leukemia." He drew a shaky breath. "Lost custody when I couldn't afford the treatments. That's why He gestured vaguely with his bandaged hand. "The bank, everything." The truth hit Jack like a physical spy blow. He thought of Emma, of how far he'd go to save her if she were sick. The anger he'd been holding on to for so long began to crack and splinter. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Jack's voice was rough with emotion. "Ashamed, I guess." Marcus wiped his face with the back of his hand. "Bad enough I let your brother die. Then I become a criminal, lose my own kid." A sob caught in his throat. "Some soldier I turned out to be." Jack reached out hesitantly, then firmly gripped Marcus's shoulder. "Tommy didn't die because of you. He died doing what he believed, in saving his fellow soldier." Marcus's whole body shook as he broke down. "I don't deserve anyone's forgiveness, especially not yours." "Maybe that's not for you to decide." Jack pulled his chair closer. "Where's Lily now?" "Foster home in Cincinnati." Marcus's words came between hitching breaths. "Haven't seen her in months. Can't even afford her medicine anymore." Jack felt something shift inside him, like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. The man before him wasn't a murderer or a hardened criminal. He was a desperate father trying to save his child. "I'm going to find her," Jack said firmly. "Make sure she's okay." Marcus's head snapped up, eyes wide with disbelief. "What? Why would you?" "Because it's what Tommy would have done." Jack's voice was steady now, certain. He took Marcus's hand, careful of the bandages. "And because it's what I'm going to do." The touch seemed to break something in Marcus. He doubled over, shoulders heaving with sobs that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. Jack held on, letting the man cry out years of pain and guilt. "I'm so sorry," Marcus kept repeating. "So sorry for everything." "I know," Jack said quietly. "I know you are." They sat there as the morning light grew stronger, two broken soldiers finding a kind of peace neither had expected. When Marcus finally calmed, he looked at Jack with red-rimmed eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not letting me die with all this still inside me." Jack squeezed his hand once more before standing. "You focus on getting better. I'll find Lily." As he walked to the door, Marcus called out weakly, "Why?" "After everything." Jack paused in the doorway, thinking of Tommy, of Emma, of all the weight they'd both been carrying. Because sometimes saving someone else is how we save ourselves. He left the hospital, stepping into the bright morning sunlight. The air felt clearer somehow, as if a storm had passed. In his pocket, he could feel Tommy's dog tags, the ones Marcus had carried all these years. He had a new mission now, not one of vengeance or justice, but of healing and redemption. The winter morning stretched cold and gray as Jack's truck headed east on I-70 toward Columbus. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. his thoughts drifting to the address scribbled on a piece of paper on the passenger seat. The foster home where Marcus's daughter lived was in a suburban neighborhood just outside the city. Fresh snow dusted the roadside, and holiday decorations still clung to lampposts even though Christmas had passed. Jack's stomach churned with nervous energy. He'd faced down armed enemies in combat, but somehow this felt more daunting. Meeting an 8-year-old girl who'd been separated from her father because of circumstances beyond anyone's control. The GPS guided him through quiet residential streets until he pulled up in front of a modest 2-story house with blue shutters. A wooden swing set stood in the side yard, its seats lightly coated with snow. Jack sat in his idling truck for a moment, gathering his thoughts. He'd called ahead, of course, spoken with Mrs. Peterson, Lily's foster mother, to explain the situation and arrange the visit. Taking a deep breath, Jack grabbed Emma's carefully rolled-up drawing from the center console and stepped out into the cold. His boots crunched on the salted walkway as he approached the front door. Before he could knock, it opened to reveal a kind-faced woman in her 50s. "Mr. Reynolds?" She smiled warmly. "I'm Patricia Peterson. Please, come in out of the cold." The house was warm and smelled of fresh-baked cookies. Family photos lined the walls, showing various children who'd passed through this home over the years. Mrs. Peterson led him to a cozy living room where a small girl sat on the couch, her thin frame almost swallowed by an oversized sweater. Lily Tate had her father's eyes, deep brown and thoughtful. Her dark hair was pulled back in neat braids, and her face was pale but beautiful in that fragile way that made Jack's heart ache. A children's book lay open on her lap, but she wasn't reading it. "Lily, Mrs. Peterson said gently, "This is Mr. Reynolds. He'd like to talk with you for a little while." Jack moved slowly, careful not to startle her, and sat in an armchair nearby. "Hi, Lily," he said softly. "You can call me Jack if you'd like." She studied him carefully, her fingers fidgeting with the corner of her book. "You know my dad?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Jack nodded, keeping his expression gentle. "I do. We were both in the army, though at different times. I've been visiting him recently." Lily's eyes widened slightly, hope flickering across her features. Is he okay?" The question trembled in the air between them. "He is," Jack assured her quickly. "He's getting better every day. The doctors are taking good care of him, and he has friends watching out for him too." Mrs. Peterson quietly excused herself to the kitchen, giving them privacy while staying within earshot, a foster parent's careful balance. "He misses you very much," Jack continued. "He talks about you all the time." He reached for the rolled-up paper he'd brought. "Actually, my daughter Emma made something. She thought you might like it." Lily accepted the drawing carefully, unrolling it with delicate fingers. Emma's artwork showed a brilliant sunrise over mountains, done in bright yellows and oranges. Below it, she'd written in her best handwriting, "Hope is like the sun. It rises every morning." A small smile tugged at Lily's lips, the first one Jack had seen. "It's pretty," she said softly. "How old is Emma?" "She's 10, Jack replied. "She'd love to meet you sometime, if that's okay with you and Mrs. Peterson." Lily traced the drawing's sun with one finger. "Does Emma know my dad, too?" "She's never met him in person, but they write letters to each other sometimes. She thinks he's very brave." Jack leaned forward slightly. "And you know what? So do I." Lily's eyes met his, searching for truth. "Really? Even though he's in trouble?" Jack chose his words carefully. "Sometimes good people make mistakes when they're trying to help the ones they love. Your dad, he was trying to take care of you the only way he thought he could. It wasn't right, but his heart was in the right place." To his surprise, Lily nodded with understanding beyond her years. "I told him not to worry about the hospital bills." "I said I was okay." Her voice caught slightly, but he wouldn't listen. Jack felt his throat tighten. That's what parents do. They never stop trying to help their kids, even when it's hard. He paused, then added, "Would you like me to take a message back to him?" Lily's face brightened. Could you tell him I'm doing better?" "The doctors say my numbers are good this month." She hesitated, then added in a rush, "And tell him I love him, even if he can't come home yet?" "I'll tell him," Jack promised, his voice rough. with emotion. Every word. They talked a while longer, Lily gradually opening up about her treatments, her favorite books, and the cat that lived next door. Mrs. Peterson brought them hot chocolate, and Jack shared stories about Emma that made Lily laugh, a sound so pure it seemed to brighten the whole room. When it was time to leave, Lily surprised him with a gentle hug. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. "Will you visit again?" "If you'd like me to," Jack replied, touched by her trust. She nodded against his shoulder before pulling away. "Next time, maybe Emma can come too?" "I think she'd like that very much." The drive home was peaceful, snow falling in lazy spirals that danced in his headlights. Jack's heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. Somewhere along these snow-covered roads, his mission of vengeance had transformed into something else entirely. A chance to heal not just himself, but others too. As the familiar outskirts of Maplewood came into view, Jack whispered into the quiet of his truck cab. One promise kept. Tommy. The county courthouse loomed before Jack, its red brick walls catching the morning light. Emma stood beside him in her Sunday best, a blue dress that made her look older than her 10 years. Her small hand squeezed his larger one as they climbed the wide stone steps. "Are you nervous, Daddy?" she whispered. Jack managed a tight smile. "A little, sweetheart, but sometimes being nervous just means you care about doing the right thing." Inside, the courthouse bustled with morning activity. Their footsteps echoed on the polished marble floors as they made their way to courtroom C. Reverend Miller waited outside, his weathered face brightening at their approach. "Good morning, Reynolds family," he said warmly, placing a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. "Ready for today?" Jack nodded, adjusting his tie. He'd pressed his best suit the night before, wanting to look respectable for his testimony. The weight of what he was about to do settled heavily on his shoulders. They filed into the courtroom, taking seats in the gallery behind the defense table. The room smelled of wood polish and aged leather, its high ceiling making even whispers seem loud. Jack noticed several veterans from the support group had come, sitting quietly in scattered rows. When the bailiff brought Marcus in, Jack barely recognized him. Gone was the desperate man from the bank, replaced by someone who looked both humbled and hopeful. Marcus wore a borrowed suit that hung slightly loose on his frame, his hands steady as they rested on the table before him. "All rise!" the bailiff called out. The Honorable Judge Patricia Whitman presiding. Judge Whitman, a stern-faced woman with silver hair, settled into her chair and reviewed the papers before her. "We're here today for the compassionate release hearing of Marcus Tate," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. "I understand there are several character witnesses present?" Marcus's court-appointed attorney stood. "Yes, Your Honor. Our first witness is Jack Reynolds." Jack squeezed Emma's hand one last time before rising. He walked to the witness stand, feeling the weight of every eye in the courtroom. After being sworn in, he sat, wiping his palms on his pants. "Mr. Reynolds," the attorney began, "could you please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant?" Jack cleared his throat, his voice steady as he spoke. "Marcus Tate served with my younger brother, Corporal Tommy Reynolds, in Iraq. For years, I thought Marcus was responsible for Tommy's death during an ambush. I was wrong." He continued, describing the truth he'd learned. How Tommy had died saving Marcus's unit. How Marcus had carried that guilt for 15 years. As he spoke, he watched Marcus bow his head, shoulders trembling slightly. "And why are you here today, supporting his release?" the attorney asked. Jack leaned forward slightly. "Because I've learned that healing is more powerful than hatred. Marcus made mistakes, serious ones, but he did them out of desperation to save his daughter. My brother Tommy died protecting his fellow soldiers. He believed in sacrifice and second chances. Supporting Marcus's rehabilitation isn't just about forgiveness. It's about honoring Tommy's memory. The prosecutors knew it. Cross-examination was brief, focusing mainly on the bank robbery. Jack remained steady, acknowledging the seriousness of the crime while emphasizing Marcus's remorse and potential for rehabilitation. Other witnesses followed. Reverend Miller spoke about Marcus's spiritual growth, and a VA counselor detailed the comprehensive veterans rehabilitation program that would accept him. Through it all, Emma sat perfectly still, her eyes never leaving her father. Finally, Marcus himself stood to address the court. His voice shook at first but grew stronger as he spoke. "Your Honor, I can't undo my mistakes. I can't bring back the peace of mind I stole from those people in the bank. I can't erase the shame I've brought to the uniform I once wore proudly." He paused, gathering himself. "But I can promise you this. If given the chance, I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of the sacrifice Corporal Reynolds made for me and the forgiveness his brother has shown me." Judge Whitman studied Marcus for a long moment before speaking. "Mr. Tate, your crimes are serious. However, I've been moved by the testimony today, particularly regarding your military service and your evident remorse." She adjusted her glasses. "I'm granting your release into the Veterans Rehabilitation Program with strict conditions, including regular counseling, employment requirements, and supervised visitation with your daughter." The relief in the courtroom was palpable. Marcus's shoulders sagged as tears rolled down his cheeks. He turned to look at Jack, mouthing, "Thank you," as his attorney hugged him. Emma bounced in her seat, grinning up at her father. Jack wrapped an arm around her shoulders, feeling a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the stuffy courtroom. As people began filing out, Marcus made his way to Jack and Emma. He knelt down to Emma's level, his eyes bright with tears. "Thank you for those letters," he said softly. "They gave me hope when I needed it most." Emma smiled shyly. "Daddy says hope is like a sunrise. It comes back every day if you look for it." Marcus stood, extending his hand to Jack. Instead of shaking it, Jack pulled him into a brief, fierce hug. No words were needed. Outside the courthouse, winter sunshine broke through the clouds, warming their faces. Emma skipped ahead down the steps, while Jack lingered for a moment. He looked up at the bright blue sky, feeling lighter than he had in years. "I think you can rest easy now, brother," he said quietly to the air. A gentle breeze ruffled his hair, and somewhere in the distance, church bells began to ring. The late afternoon sun painted long shadows across the Maplewood Veterans Memorial lawn. American flags rippled in the autumn breeze, their fabric snapping like distant gunfire. Jack Reynolds stood at the edge of the makeshift stage, his heart drumming against his chest as he watched the crowd gather on folding chairs. Marcus Tate waited beside him, dressed in a clean but borrowed suit that hung slightly loose on his thin frame. 3 months in, the Veterans Rehabilitation Program had brought color back to his face, but his eyes still carried the weight of past battles. "You sure about this?" Marcus whispered, tugging at his collar. Jack nodded, spotting Emma in the front row. She wore a yellow dress that reminded him of sunshine breaking through storm clouds. "Some stories need telling," he said quietly. "Some hurts need healing." Reverend Miller stepped up to the podium, his silver hair catching the light. "Today," he began, his voice carrying across the gathered townspeople, "we're here to witness something remarkable. 2 soldiers, once divided by tragedy, united by grace." He gestured to Jack and Marcus. "I give you Sergeant Jack Reynolds." Jack's boots felt heavy as he approached the microphone. Familiar faces looked back at him. Mrs. Jenkins from the bank, Sheriff Davis, his co-workers from the garage. But it was Emma's encouraging smile that steadied his nerves. 15 years ago, Jack began, his voice rough with emotion, "I lost my brother Tommy in Iraq. He died a hero, saving his fellow soldiers. But for years, I carried that loss like a wound that wouldn't heal. I let grief turn to anger. I needed someone to blame." He paused, glancing at Marcus. "When Marcus Tate walked into Maplewood Community Bank that day, I thought God was giving me justice. Instead, he was teaching me about mercy." The crowd sat silent, hanging on every word. Even the wind seemed to still. Tommy didn't die fighting Marcus. He died saving him and his unit. "My brother gave his life because he believed every soul was worth saving." Jack's voice cracked slightly. "It took me 15 years to understand what Tommy knew in those final moments. That love is stronger than hate. That grace can mend what violence breaks." Emma wiped tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. Several veterans in the audience nodded slowly, understanding etched in their weathered faces. I stand here today not as a hero who stopped a bank robbery, but as a man who learned that true courage isn't about fighting, it's about forgiving. Jack gestured to Marcus. This man has become more than just another veteran to me. He's living proof that second chances aren't just possible, they're necessary. Marcus stepped forward, his hands trembling as he gripped the podium. His voice was soft, but clear. I carried Tommy Reynolds' dog tags for 15 years, trying to honor the man who saved my life by giving up his own. But I didn't honor him by letting guilt destroy me. He looked directly at Jack. Tommy's sacrifice taught me about courage. His brother's forgiveness taught me about grace. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Jenkins dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. This town, Marcus continued, has shown me that it's never too late to start over. Tommy Reynolds died believing in second chances. Today, I dedicate mine to his memory. The applause started slowly, then swelled like a wave. Jack watched as Emma stood up, clapping with all her might, tears streaming down her face, even as she smiled. Other people rose too, until the whole crowd was on their feet. Jack felt something release in his chest, a knot of pain he'd carried so long, he'd forgotten it was there. He looked at Marcus and saw not an enemy or even a fellow soldier, but simply a man finding his way home from war, just like him. Reverend Miller returned to the podium, but Jack barely heard the closing prayer. His eyes were fixed on Emma, her face glowing with pride and love. In that moment, he felt Tommy's presence more clearly than he had in years, not as a ghost of grief, but as a light of grace. When the ceremony ended, Emma ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. Jack lifted her up, holding her close as people filed past, offering handshakes and quiet thanks. I love you, Daddy, she whispered in his ear. Jack held his daughter tighter, feeling the weight of the past finally lifting from his shoulders. The war that had raged in his heart for so long was over. Peace, at last, had won. Marcus stood nearby, watching father and daughter with gentle eyes. Jack reached out and clasped his shoulder, completing a circle of healing that began with a brother's sacrifice in the desert so many years ago. The late afternoon sun painted everything in gold, and for the first time in years, Jack felt truly, completely at home. Warm yellow light spilled from the windows of the Reynolds home, creating a cozy glow against the darkening sky. Inside, the house hummed with contentment as Jack and Emma stood in the living room, carefully positioning a new photograph on the wall. The picture showed 3 men at the Veterans Memorial earlier that day. Jack in his formal blazer, Marcus in a pressed blue shirt, and between them, a framed photo of Tommy in his dress uniform, propped on an easel. A little higher on the left, Dad, Emma directed, her head tilted as she studied the frame's angle. Her pink unicorn pajamas caught the lamplight as she pointed up at the wall. Jack adjusted the frame, his fingers gentle against the glass. How's that, kiddo? Perfect, Emma beamed, stepping back to admire their handiwork. The photo joined other family memories on the wall. Emma's school pictures, Sarah's smile frozen in time, and old snapshots of Tommy and Jack in uniform. You know what would make this even better? Jack asked, wrapping an arm around Emma's shoulders. Her eyes lit up. Hot cocoa? With extra marshmallows? Jack winked, heading to the kitchen. Emma followed, her sock feet padding across the hardwood floors. In the kitchen, Jack pulled out 2 matching mugs, Christmas presents from last year, each decorated with snowflakes. As he heated milk on the stove, Emma sat at the counter, swinging her legs. Today was really special, she said, watching her father stir the cocoa powder into the warming milk. When Marcus hugged you after the speech, I saw him crying. Jack nodded, his throat tight with emotion. Sometimes good tears heal better than medicine, sweetheart. The cocoa ready, Jack dropped a handful of mini marshmallows into each mug. They carried their treats to the living room sofa, settling into their favorite spots. Through the window, fat snowflakes had begun to fall, dancing in the porch light. Remember when you used to tell me Uncle Tommy was watching over us from heaven? Emma asked, marshmallow foam dotting her upper lip. I do. Jack replied softly.
I think he still is, she said. But now, he's not sad anymore.
He's happy because you and Marcus are friends. Jack felt his eyes grow misty. He set his mug down and pulled Emma close, kissing the top of her head.
When did you get so wise, huh?
Emma giggled. Mom always said I got that from her. They sat together, watching the snow fall and sharing quiet laughter as Emma told stories about her school day. The tension that had lived in Jack's shoulders for so many years had finally melted away, replaced by a peaceful warmth he'd almost forgotten existed. When Emma's mug was empty and her eyes grew heavy, Jack stood up. Time for bed, princess.
5 more minutes?
She pleaded, but a yawn gave her away. Nice try, Jack chuckled, helping her up. They climbed the stairs together, passing family photos that tracked Emma's growth from baby to bright-eyed 10-year-old. In her bedroom, Emma climbed under her lavender comforter as Jack tucked the edges around her. The soft glow of her star-shaped nightlight cast gentle shadows on the walls. Outside, snow continued to fall, making the world quiet and new. Emma looked up at her father, her eyes serious. Daddy, are you happy now? Jack paused, really considering the question. The weight that had pressed on his heart for 15 years had lifted. The anger that once burned like acid had transformed into something healing, something whole. Yeah, sweetheart, he answered truthfully. I finally am. Emma smiled, satisfied, and closed her eyes. Good. Love you, Daddy. Love you too, baby girl. Jack kissed her forehead and quietly left the room. Downstairs, he pulled on his coat and stepped out onto the front porch. The snow fell silently, coating the world in pristine white. Across the street, the new mural on the Veterans Center wall seemed to glow in the streetlight. A stunning portrait of Tommy in his dress blues, his kind eyes watching over the neighborhood. Below the image, carefully painted letters spelled out, "Love wins where hate ends." The mural had been Marcus's idea, his way of honoring Tommy's sacrifice and their shared journey toward healing. Local veterans had worked together to create it, turning a blank wall into a testament of redemption. Jack's breath fogged in the cold air as he looked at his brother's painted face. The artist had captured Tommy perfectly. That hint of a smile, the determined set of quote, his jaw, the compassion in his eyes that had driven him to save Marcus's life at the cost of his own. Lifting his hand in a gentle salute, Jack whispered into the snowy night, "We made it home, brother." Behind him, warm light spilled from the windows of his house, and for the first time in years, Jack felt completely at peace. The wounds of war had finally healed, faith had been restored, and love, just as Tommy had believed, had won in the end. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Jack Reynolds, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.